Hello, everybody. Am I good to see everybody again? Um, Happy to be with you today and to introduce my good friend. I won't say how many years, Dr. Irma McClaurin. I first knew Dr. McClaurin as a poet, but I'm doing an official introduction here, so I need to put more words to that. Um, uh, she is an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist in the spirit of Zora Neale Hurston, and is done one of the few people who has done the most work, I think, in really reclaiming Hurston in that domain, perhaps even giving a sense of originality to what we know as cultural anthropology. She is a Black feminist speaker. Many of you may have heard her already because she has done much work in that area, both in terms of theorizing about it, but also her practice. Um, some of you may know the work that she has done through the Black Feminist Archive, but I'll just mention that she's also had an incredible career as a foundation executive and a college president. The first, I think, woman president at Shaw University. And so today, of course, she's with us to talk more about the work she's currently engaged in. She founded, I think, in 2016, the Irma McClaurin Black Feminist Archive, a collaboration with the University of Massachusetts Amherst's W.B. Du Bois Library, Department of Special Collections. And it has grown, of course, since then. We were talking about earlier about getting things through the archive. She's going to talk a little bit more about that today. And she's been presenting on it because this idea of the archive, we're in what I call an archival turn at this moment. And it's really important because of the opportunities for digitizing and preserving. And if we don't claim it now, we stand to lose stuff forever. And so it becomes really important to think about how to create archives, how to sustain archives, preserve archives, and how to make use of them. In connection with that, she's been doing presentations on the archive. She's got Ms. Magazine published an interview about that in 2018. And I like this quote that I'm going to end with and pass the baton over to her. The archive will be a game changer by preserving and showcasing the intellectual and activist contributions of Black feminists for all eternity. Irma, thank you for joining us once again, and I'm handing it over to you. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Mary Emma, for that wonderful introduction. It's always a pleasure. I see friends. I've gotten to know Erin and, of course, my colleague, Dr. Marilyn Thomas Houston. And so welcome, everybody. What I thought I'd do is start first with a PowerPoint that shows you a slideshow about the archive, just so you get a sense of what it is I've been trying to do. And then I want to hopefully make this more of a conversation as I go through another presentation. I don't want to talk at you. I think you've heard me enough do that. So I'm going to start, I'm going to share the screen, and I'm going to start with the presentation about the archive. Oops, did I stop it? Sorry about that. So I wanted to begin with that to just give you some sense of the kind of people who are going to be in it. And it's grown since those of you who've seen me the last time may have seen it. We didn't have the sound the last time, but there's a woman named May Upperman that I mentioned who's in there. And she's important because a friend of hers contacted us and said, I saw the article on you, and I have this friend, May Upperman, who at that moment was actually in a nursing home and who is actually in hospice. Any minute she could leave us for the ancestors. And she said, my friend collected these books on Black women. And I said, well, you know, the library probably has some of the books, but I'm really interested in why she collected it. So I contacted the reporter who had done this story on me at the University College newspaper and asked her if she would go and visit her in Boston, which is like a 2-hour drive. She agreed. And I said, you know, the interview will go into the archive and, you know, this is your contribution and I appreciate it. And she basically said, I don't think there's a story here. Well, she got to meet Miss May, and it turns out there was a story. And she actually wrote a story called Portrait of a Black Woman. And you'll be able to find the link to that in the PowerPoint. And in that, she discovered that May was probably one of the first people to get like, you know, she was among those who were just starting to integrate at places like Boston University. She was very early on working in sort of the Head Start program. And then it turns out that she actually was a self-taught artist. And so we are getting some of her artwork as well. And then it turns out that she's connected to someone who is, they have a building named after him at Fayetteville State. And so you begin to find that as you dig into people's lives, that there's much more richness in there than what you might have anticipated. And I think that's sort of the story that I want to talk about. I'm going to share the screen again. And so what I want to do is introduce you to sort of archiving the self is what I'm calling it. And it's really, I hate it when they have these things up here. Takes away, but archiving the self, a work in progress, because that's what you all are, is a work in progress. And what you are looking at is a portrait, a photo that I took at the end of February. This is Mrs. Edith Winfrow Smith. She is 109 and a half years old, and she is the oldest living alumni of my alma mater, Grinnell College. And she is still lucid. And I spent 4 hours with her, talking with her in Chicago. And while she was not tired, I was. And this is a woman who has seen a span. She graduated from Grinnell in 1937. She's obviously the only member of her class who's still living. And her face to me sort of captures the richness. But what we learn about her is that she's part of a family of Black people who lived in Grinnell, Iowa. And that was something that when I went to school there in 1969, we were given the impression that there were no Indigenous Black people in Grinnell, you know, that we were sort of unwanted folks. What we have now discovered is not only was she there, but she had, her mother had 2 sisters who lived there. Her grandmother lived there. And there were other Black families in the town. And that whole history has been erased. And it's now being recaptured by a sister who is the head of the Women's Studies, Gender and Women's Studies Department, who's been working with her. And Dr. Tamara Abufo, who is herself of Haitian descent, has been working with students to capture and reclaim the story of Miss Edith. And so she's an example of what would be lost. And I'm happy to say that when I met with her, her daughter, who is 78, said that we could have her papers in the archive. Most of the materials have been digitized, but the original photographs that date back to before there was color, you know, these things become very precious items. And while digitization is wonderful, we also want to preserve the original materials. So what I want you to think about is yourself, like, you know, what is for you So one of the things, let me go back. So one of the questions that I asked you almost a year ago was, how many of you now think you carry an archive inside? And Erin, if you can sort of see if there are any hand raises. Miriam, if you don't raise your hand, I know something's wrong. But how many people? Jade, okay. And I've been talking to Marilyn. So how many people do we have, Erin?
I think I see one hand raise.
Okay.
Okay, I forgot about that.
Okay, raise your hand, Miriam.
That's what I'm doing. Oop, that's me.
Two.
Okay. And I'm going to sort of continue this conversation by asking that. And when I want you to think about is, what does your stuff consist of, right? Like if we think about what it is, and these are some of the things that the Society of archivists have put together, and they talk about the personal records. This is kind of hard to read, so I've kind of put it here. So we think about letters and emails. And for those of us who use email a lot, you have to start thinking about how are you going to get those things off? You know, you can convert them into PDFs now. If you do a print mode, sometimes your printer actually has a PDF mode where you can convert it into a PDF, but you have to start thinking about downloading those things. The kind of materials that go into your stuff are memoirs, reminiscence, diaries, blogs. Again, blogs are digital. And so if you're not there to maintain that blog site, what's going to happen? And I've learned a hard lesson. My very first website was very extensive, and I wrote a lot of blogs on the site. Well, if you have hyperlinks to things, if the platform changes, those links disappear, it becomes dead. So you can't really use it. So I learned my lesson to actually write my blogs in Word and then cut and paste them into the site so that I always had a Word version of what it was that I was posting. I also started putting, when I was using my, posting my articles from Insight News, I now put the full article in, because every time Insight News changed its platform, the hyperlink that I had would no longer be valid. So you have to begin to think about those things, that platforms change, links change, and what is valid, like in today, in 3 years could become an invalid platform. So you want to think about how you preserve that. Of course, I don't know if people do scrapbooks anymore. Everything is so digital, but your phone will curate. If you have an iPhone, it actually curates photos. I save those and I post and I upload them to a Dropbox. So I'm making sure that if I'm not using a physical scrapbook, that the scrapbook that the iPhone is creating for me, that I'm actually maintaining that. We think about professional papers, and one of the things that is, I think, unique about the UMass archive, which is the special collections, and it's actually been renamed, it's called the Robert S. Cox Special Collections and University Archives Research Center. It's become a center. It's named after the person who I connected with, Rob Cox, who passed away a couple of years ago. And they see themselves as an archive of social change. And one of the things that they're very interested in is the whole life. So while this talks about professional papers, I want you to also think about, what about other papers you may have, talks that you presentations you have made at your church, or if you're in a sorority or a fraternity, things that you might have done with those. So your life is not just what you've done professionally. It's not just your career. Any genealogical information, people are finding their roots, they're doing ancestry, but any information you have like that is going to be helpful in developing an archive, because it gives us the range of all the people you could be connected to. Of course, speeches and lectures, those that you give formally, those that you give informally, all of those are important. Articles and essays that are published and unpublished. Subject files, I maintained a lot of material for when I was teaching, research notes and field notes. And it was really in search of Zora Neale Hurston's field notebooks that really started me on this idea of formalizing archives. I think it was sort of in the back of my head, even though I have been saving material since high school. And actually, my mother kept the poetry books that I wrote when I was in second grade, when I was 8 years old. So I actually had those. She kept those. She preserved them. But if you think, it was in search of Zora's field notes, and I couldn't find them. And I believe that her economic situation was so dire, she would put stuff in storage and then she wouldn't have enough money to get it out. And so what I discovered in going through archives that she herself had given over to the Yale Library at the Beinecke Library at the request of Carl Van Vechten, what I discovered was that she, in fact, had written a lot of notes about her research in letters to Langston Hughes. And so Langston Hughes retained those letters, and that's where she talks about Cujo or Casulo, who is the subject of the Barracoon book that was published 85 years after she had written it. You know, these are the kinds of things. So your research notes become important. Legal documents, you know, I have copies of an old will that I did, and there will be copies of my current will and stuff. Trusts that I've put in, so people sort of understand what I was thinking at the time. If you are part of an organization, minutes, reports, I still have a few files from Transforming Anthropology. I was the editor for 7 years, and so I think about the notes and things that go with that tell a story about that period of time. Of course, any brochures and flyers that you either wrote or that you're involved in. I actually wrote a number of admissions brochures, and those are going into the archive. And then website content, we'll come back to that, because at this moment in time, while there is something called Time Machine, it's very difficult to preserve a website as it's interactive. They can freeze it in time, but they can't really give you the feel of what the website was when it was active. And so I'm waiting to see if the technology becomes very more sophisticated. Any awards and certificates, you know, that you might have. If you've received plaques, those things become part of it. Photographs, and you want to be able to identify who the person or people are and where these things take place. Films, videos, audio tapes. I have a collection of Black films that I collected when I lived in New York that I will be putting into the archive. And they tell a story about what my interests were. Some were used for classes, some were for entertainment, but I feel like collecting those gives people a sense of what were the kinds of things I was viewing, right? So I want to give you a sense of what this looks like when you go to photos. So this is Credo. This is the digital platform for images at the University of Massachusetts. And this is the Irma McClaurin papers. And in the papers are my photographs. They call everything papers. And we've been talking about whether we need to call them photographs. But right now it's called Irma McClaurin papers. They have digitized, Rob Cox, before he passed away, had digitized 397 of my photographs. And these are black and white photos. And what you'll see is I have 55 photos of James Baldwin. I have 41 of Jesse Jackson. I have photos taken at the first Women's Studies Conference for the Department of Gender and Women's Studies at UMass back in the 80s. Nancy Morahone visited. She's a Cuban poet, and I have photographs of her. But let me show you the Baldwin one, sort of why it's important. Okay, so here is this, I'm taking you to, so this is the Credo, which is the digital platform for photographs at the University of Massachusetts. 397 of mine have been archived. I'll take you to Baldwin. And this is the photo of me and James Baldwin at his 60th birthday party. I was actually very happy. And so what you'll see is sort of the information, the metadata, sort of what it is, when it was taken. This was a photograph of me. It was taken by Gary Tartikoff with my camera. And then it just tells you all these kinds of things. And then there's citation information that they've created. And what we're in the process of doing now is that some of the metadata for the photographs are not correct. When Rob archived them, he had a negative sheet. And sometimes I would take a photograph of like one person or an event, but there would be additional photos. So we've now got to go in and update those. So as you're putting things together, if you have negatives or images, you need to clarify which things are part of the subject and which ones might be separate. So one of the questions that comes up when I first began this work was, who is worthy of archiving? And now there is recognition among archivists that they have been very exclusionary. And there is a whole discussion in the archival field about archival silences. There's been a lot of written about them. There are books on them now. There have been, journal articles. And so the field is changing, but I need to bring to your attention that at this moment in time, by last count, that there were only something like, and when they talk about the profession of archiving, they include people working in museums as well, like exhibition builders. In those fields, the percentage of African Americans, Black people, are less than 4%. Latinos are less than 3%, and Indigenous Native people are less than 1%. So it's a very tiny field. And one of the purposes of the Black Feminist Archive at UMass is to change the profession. So we are committed to doing what we can to create like fellowships for Black archivists so that they can work on material that is of value to them and that speaks to their identity and their history. So one of the things that's happened, Miriam indicated that I started this in 2016. That was the formal announcement, but I've actually been working with UMass since 2014. And it began with a cold call to Rob Cox. And after I finished talk, first he never answers his phone. He happened to answer that day. And we had this conversation, and I can say that I truly felt heard, at that point. And the next day he sent me pretty much a 2-page email that said, this is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. And he himself personally digitized 397 of my photos. That was what I came with first. The papers had not yet come to the institution. And now I want to show you how much interest there is now in the lives of Black women. There is a list called Black Feminist Archives. Blackfeminism.com is at Black Feminisms on Twitter. This is a young woman who was, as a PhD student, she began to list this list of Black archives, right? And so she's got a list of them, and she did add my name. I reminded her that I was here, and so she was able to update it. But these are all lists of archives that have to do with Black women. And I think she keeps adding to it because it's gotten much bigger since the last time we talked. And so this is another one. You'll see this one is the National Park Service. This was an article that I did for UMass called Visible and Heard, in which I talk about the importance of archive. And this has become our tagline, our mantra, that our goal is to make Black women visible and heard. And so I'm very proud of that. And then we have, this is another one. So as I come across things both in the United States and internationally, I try and keep track of who's doing work on archiving Black women. There is much more material out there now than there was when I started. And what I'm finding is that librarians are now going to their Black faculty and saying, oh, we'd like to have you, in our archive. And I think that's well and good, but one of the things that makes what I'm doing different is that I'm building an archival home. I'm trying to create a constellation. So there is synergy, and there is, as my mother would say, instead of being a fly in a buttermilk, that there is going to be a group of Black women, a grouping of stuff. And my vision is to make mine the largest archive of its kind for Black women in the world. It is interdisciplinary. It is focused on people who are scholars, who are activists, because activists do the work, but they don't often take time to document the work. So I've been talking specifically to activists, and I was fortunate to get a Winter Grant grant called Global Initiative Grant to go out and identify practicing Black women anthropologists, that is, those who are not in the academy, because often they get sort of pushed to the side or they get forgotten because the work they do is either in communities or they're working with nonprofits or they're working in museums. And so I'm actually on a project to identify as many as I can. So if you know of any, please let me know. And then this was an interesting article. The African American Intellectual Historical Society did an article on Black women's voices in the archive. So suddenly we have become the flavor of the month. Everybody kind of wants us. And so as you think about that, just remember that there is now greater interest than there has been. So what goes into the archive? They're the usual suspects. You know, we do things like recipes, calendars, you know, books, papers, photographs. Can anyone think of any other things that you might want to find in an archive? Is it just Jada who's out there? Did we get any more people? What are the kinds of things? Here's some of the usual suspects. And if you haven't thought about collecting your recipes, you should think about that because they tell a story. You know, either you were taking over someone else's recipes or their favorite things, but they tell us a story. One of my former students, well, one of my students who's now a professor, she had put together as part of her anthropology class, she had students collect recipes from family. And then they would actually have an event where they would make the recipes, but having them tell the story about why is that particular recipe so important to them or to their family.
I know there's a person with an archive of funeral programs.
Ah, good point. Good point. I'll make a list of that. And you know what? Now that you said that, I've been collecting those for my family. So yes, funeral programs. Any other suggestions? Because I'll add those to the list for the next time. Okay,
this is pretty comprehensive. That is I don't know who said funeral programs, but that is, yes, that's definitely currently being done here at a neighboring library in Atlanta, and also quilts as well. But this list looks pretty extensive.
Okay, but those are some good ones. Calendars, because sometimes people actually make, oh, they are up there, but family calendars. I know a friend who's put together family calendars as well, so that is up there, but those are two good suggestions that I will add to the list. Thank you. And then in this digital age, we have disk, and I don't know how many of you remember those big floppy disks, okay, that maybe there is or is not a computer that can read them. Some libraries still have the old computers that can read those, but all forms. I have my hard disk that my dissertation is on, and I actually still have a Macintosh laptop that can read it. So I plan to turn both of those items over to the library, and also the 35mm camera that I use to take the black and white, mostly my black and white photos. And then I started using different smaller cameras when I was in the field. But most of my black and whites were taken with a 35mm Canon AE1, and that camera still works. It takes film, and it's still, I had it brought up to spec some years ago. Emails, again, start thinking about key correspondence that you've had with people about either books or about an article or about something that has to do, that's of importance to you. How do you preserve those? You can print them out, that's a lot of paper, or you can create PDFs of them and turn them into digital files. But that correspondence, because unless someone can get to your computer, if they don't have access, it gets lost. And that could be enormous stories that are getting lost in the digital age. So think about that. Hard drive, thumb drives, cloud storage, phone data. And so I have all of my photos. I have about 39,000 on my phone that are automatically uploaded to a Dropbox and to the cloud. And I've given other people access to that so they don't get lost. Facebook postings. You can apparently download your Facebook postings and your tweets. I've done about 10 to 12,000 tweets, and I need to now go back and preserve those. People don't think about Facebook, but sometimes people are really telling a lot about themselves or about issues that are important to them in these Facebook postings, and you want to be able to preserve those, okay? LinkedIn, before there was Medium, you could actually create articles on LinkedIn. And so I actually wrote articles on LinkedIn that I now need to preserve. But what I generally did was to write them in a Word document and then post them onto LinkedIn. Instagram, TikToks, I download my videos, I save them because once they're on the platform, that platform may stay. There's a huge controversy because TikTok, I think, is owned by China. And so there's questions about security and it could disappear. So if you have anything on TikTok, you may want to save it separately so that it doesn't disappear. And then iMovies. So when you think about archiving yourself, what does it take? And one is that I want you to focus on the whole lives. Often when people ask us what we do, we tend to think about our professional selves. And so you say, I'm a professor, I'm a graduate student, or, I'm a researcher. But what about the rest of your life? I tell people that I was born a poet and I became an anthropologist. So there's a whole aspect of my life as a poet that needs to be preserved that I want to make sure people have a sense of. Being radically honest and vulnerable. When speaking with one person who was putting her archive together, she kept resisting. And I was like, why is it taking you so long to do this? And she finally sat back and said, when I started going through those materials, I began to realize there were so many things that I had wanted to accomplish that I did not. And so it became painful for me to see what I did not get to do. And then there were things that I did do that I'd totally forgotten about. So this is a journey, and it's a journey that requires you to be both radically honest and vulnerable with yourself. As I said, you come face to face with what you did and what you didn't do. You also have to decide what personal material should be archived, what things should be marked confidential. What things do you decide, well, they really don't need to know about that, so I think I'll destroy them. Those are choices that you have to make. The archivists, once you mark it confidential, you can put on there not to be open until after I'm gone, right? They will respect that. But if you don't put anything on it, then all of these documents become part of a public record. So you need to think about that when you're putting things in. And then you have to decide, what is the story of you that you want to tell? That becomes really important. And that means beginning to write your own biography, or, the bio that you put, and putting together all the various resumes, making sure that the resume is up to date. If some of you who are actually creative people may actually have press packets and things of that nature, all of those things need to be archived. One example we have is Z. Edgel. She is the only internationally published author of Belize Central America, which is where I did my field work. I knew her personally and as part of my research. And then I got to know her family because her son, after she visited, fell in love with Grinnell and actually went there and graduated. He then went on to become a doctor. And in between, he married one of my students who was my anthropology researcher. And so this family made the decision to put Z. Edgel's materials in my archive as opposed to Belize. They felt they would be more accessible, with the proviso that if Belize needed to borrow or wanted to borrow anything for like an exhibition, that they would have de facto permission to do that. So you can put those kinds of caveats in there that will make it possible. Some people will say, well, I want it to stay in the state where I am. But if the state doesn't have the resources for your material to be preserved in the way that it should be, you can put a proviso that if they want to borrow material, they can. But this way, you know that it's being preserved. I made a decision about where to put my material because it needed to be in a research one. People might ask, why not an HBCU? I've worked at 3. And I know what the pros and cons are. Many of them just don't have the resources to accommodate large groups of people coming in to do research. And so I was trying to be very pragmatic about it, but also to wanting it to have the widest possible exposure. And particularly since I'm inviting other people in, you want it to be able, people to be able to access the material easily, to have a place to do the work. And not every small institution is set up to do that. So that's one of the things that you want to keep in mind. So for those of you who carry an archive inside, what 3 things do you want preserved? If you had to select 3 things, and just raise your hand and share with us, like what 3 things would you want preserved? Just take a minute to think about that. Jada, can you let us know what 3 things you'd like?
Sure, I'll go. This is a dream archive with so much funding, it's unreal. So the first thing would be my books, which I have a lot of books. So that would take a lot of effort. The second thing would be, and this would also be difficult, but I doodle a lot.
Yeah.
And every doodle is not productive or necessary, but I feel like some of the genius things that you write on a scrap of paper, if you were looking towards the future, you would save them. And the third thing is, well, whatever music format is around in a future time, if not the music, then kind of like, I just went to the museum in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go and they let you use the bracelet to capture songs and send them back to yourself and make a Spotify list. You can make a Spotify list. So if not the actual music, then the music that I liked and listened to somehow preserved.
So if nothing else, a music list, right, of what it is that you listen to, because somewhere the music is going to be there. They may not. Well, I'm a CD baby, so I have a huge collection of CDs that are going into the archives, unless my son steals them first. And then after that, he has all my vinyl. So those I've turned over to him years ago. But the CDs, you know, I had a lot of international CDs, but those are good. The doodles are important because they show us people process differently. And I know that there was a guy who I knew back in the 80s who used to doodle all the time, and they became like works of art. You know, people were really fascinated with this. So I think those are important, you know, pieces. Clothing, which is something that's not on there, not a lot because archives aren't set up, but maybe a sample of something. There are 2 pieces of clothing that I want preserved. One is a duster that's made out of mud cloth. That's because it was a gift to me from Dr. Janetta Cole, who was my mentor, but also it is what I wore on the cover of the back photo on Black Feminist Anthropology. So it has special meaning in that sense as a gift and also as a symbol of like how I wanted to be presented in that photo on the back of what is a landmark book. The second is a 3-piece silk African caftan top and long skirt that was made by a woman named Westlove out of California. And the reason for that is that I wore that in a portrait that was made of me. And that portrait appears in a book on how to draw. The artist is a well-known North Carolinian artist. And I was a member of on the board of Art Space. And so, you know, we have these first Fridays and I'm going through her, you know, her studio, and there's this, you know, this display of these portraits that she's got this book she's been commissioned to do. And it's to teach art teachers how to draw portraits, right, and paint them. And so I said, you got any Black people in there? And she said, 1. And I said, oh, and she says, do you want to be in it? And I said, of course. So I'm in the book. And so that when she came to do the sitting, I happened to wear that piece. So I have the original portrait that she painted and then the book that it's in. And so those are 2 pieces that have special meaning for me. So you might think about that along with quilts, you know, those kinds of things. And what I have done with some people where they have a lot of artifacts versus literary materials that we often find in university archives, I've connected them to a museum and said, well, maybe some of the things should go there since, and this was Rochester. There was someone in Rochester. And so I connected them with the Rochester Museum and Science Center, which had done a huge exhibit on the change makers, Rochester women who changed the world. And this woman wasn't in it, but they were encouraging people to keep adding to that exhibit. And so I said, well, we would like a sample of some of her plaques and things. She was a member of the Harriet Tubman Club. This was someone's mother-in-law. And so we were going through the items, and I said, we would like a sample along with her papers, but the rest of the material really should go someplace where they can be, preserved and on display in that sense. Who else? Jada, besides Jada. Okay, if you don't carry an arsenal, okay, Mariama, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was just thinking, I have in my hand, it occurred to me, everybody in my family, it turns out, kept a particular private Bible. And I was trying to find some dates from several generations back, and there were disputes in the Bible about when they recorded information. So I can't find who was born when, because people had different dates, but there were also notes in the Bible. So apparently people use it to hide information. I mean, I didn't think about that. So I'm now collecting, going back over my mother's, who was the last member of that generation to pass, because she kept everything, but they belonged to other people. And I don't know the extent to which she saw things or she filtered through things, but I am now finally able to put together a family chronology in the Bibles, because they put down marriages, births, deaths, and if you didn't like somebody, you left their name off. So it's an interesting way of tracking family history and debates that people had, depending on what side of the family you came from. So it hadn't occurred to me that people might have individual Bibles that were just very private, very special. But that's the latest thing on a list I'm now paying attention to.
Absolutely.
Not just one family Bible, but the multiple Bibles that different family members of the same generation, perhaps.
And what would be interesting is a description is if you line them up, like this Bible is from so, and this is what they recorded, and then this is from someone else, what they didn't record, so you see where there's symmetry, right? But also where there are gaps where people chose not to record. And that's fascinating, because now you're getting a sense of family dynamics.
Yeah, and I knew that there were battles in the family. My mother was sort of the she would try to navigate the different stories, and so hers is much more comprehensive, and she'll put a question mark by something she entered just to make, and I guess she was going to go correct it later, but she was the last living member, and I guess she felt a sense of obligation to do that. But I can see the difference between the early and the mid and later Bibles. But many people, I know the religious culture in the Bible was a very important element, a very important book for so many families. But I hadn't thought about the Bibles talking to each other.
That is fascinating. That's an article. When Bibles talk. That's great. Well, those of you who didn't raise your hand, if you don't think you carry an archive inside, I want you to think about reasons why not. Just take a few minutes. And I'm not going to ask you to reveal, I just want you to reflect on it. But I can tell you that when I first started doing presentations, the first one was in 2016. I happened to be at Grinnell doing another presentation, and one of my former students, Angela Onawachi, who is now a member of the Board of Trustees, because she also is the dean, the first Black woman dean at the Boston University Law School. And she was at the University of Iowa Law School, and she asked me if I would present to what's called the Ludi Lido Conference. And Ludi Lido, I think, was one of the first Black women to receive, what do you call it when you get certified, to get a law, what is it?
Yeah.
Yes. Not a law degree. I think she actually was the first to get to pass the law boards or something.
Pass the bar?
Yeah, the bar, to pass the bar. And her father had been an enslaved person. And so they come together, they write, They sit in a room and do group writing, everyone working on the project. And then the next day they have presentations to get feedback. So
Yeah.
I present pretty much the same slideshow you saw to 124 women, Black women. And I say, so how many of you think you should be, have thought about archiving yourself? One hand went up out of 124 people. And the only reason that person's hand went up was because she is the dean of the University of Iowa Law School. At that moment in time, she was one of only 2 Black women dean of law schools in the country. And the archivist came to her because she recognized how important it was. And what we found, myself and my colleague, Dr. Keishel Scott, when we would go around to different conferences to talk about and present on the archive, the usual response was, I didn't think what I did was important enough. So we have this notion of archives as something that is the domain of people who have significance or importance. And the question is, who decides that, right? And often what I say is that we've kind of replicated the great man theory, but we've done it in either Black or in gender. So we have the great Black woman, but if they're famous, so I call them sort of marquee people. So everybody wants a marquee person. Everybody wants the Alice Walker. Everybody wants the Angela Davis. Everybody wants, whoever the marquee happens to be at that moment. And then all the other people who were supporting them or who actually were doing activist struggles, but didn't necessarily get the media recognition because, they can only have one of us at a time on TV. Those people get lost. So my archive is geared towards people who are not marquee status. That's not to say, for example, we will have the papers of Carol Fredericks. You saw her face. I call her the 21st century Josephine Baker. And what makes her marquee, she went to Paris in the late 70s speaking no French. She became fluent, but she's also the baby sister of Taj Mahal, who's one of the great all-time blues singers. And the family has agreed to put her materials in my archive. She is, however, buried in Paris because the French government contacted them and said she belongs to us. And so she is buried in Cemetery Montmartre, which you can only be buried in by invitation. And here's the thing, she is an icon there. Had she been brought back to the United States, she would have been buried in an ordinary cemetery and nobody would really know who she was. There, the cemeteries in Paris, in France, are like parks. They're like outdoor museums. And so they have these enormous, amazing sculptures and things. And so if you stop at the gate and say, I'm looking for the cemetery, the grave of Carol Fredericks, they will point to you on a map and they know exactly who she is because she's now among greatness. And so there's an irony about how she would not be recognized the same way here, but she's given that kind of treatment. So we're very fortunate because most of her materials would be in both French and English that, and apparently she kept a great scrapbook. So I'm in touch with her sister and, and by default Taj Mahal, and they've agreed to put her materials in my archive. So I'm very, pleased with that. So this idea that you have to be important to be in an archive is really something that was promoted at the beginning because archives were built for the rich and the famous. It was their way of preserving their legacy. But legacy building is not something that belongs to any one person. It belongs to all of us. And so you have to think about the archive you carry inside. And when people start really reflecting, just as Dr. Mariama did, you begin to uncover that there are things about your family that you may not have known, that you may discover in the process of pulling it together. And that's important. The Guardian just posted an article maybe 2 weeks ago in which they talked about how Black archives may actually be the solution to this attempt to erase Black history and culture that is going on in the United States. We have to start teaching our children and as members of the community how to use archives and use primary material, because that may be the only source that people will be able to get authentic information. You know, we won't know how long this phase of erasure is going to last. But in the meantime, we need to be preserving everything we can while we can. So I'm just gonna, we've got some little time left. I'm gonna open it up for questions and comments and to have you chat and think out loud observations that we can capture.
So I have a question, Irma.
Yes.
So we have a project that is associated with one of our grants. And one of the things we're running into are that archives, you were fortunate that you had a relationship with the University of Massachusetts, you knew the archivist, but many collections are now closed, particularly at HBCUs, and photographs of long standing are being digitized by Getty Foundation, and Getty, of course, is taking control of ownership, and there's a political, some political franchising being done there. But mainly the archives are not available. And so if you want to go to, for instance, a local institution where you completed your work and you felt that that's where your archive belonged, the archives are closed, there's no archivist there, it's underfunded. So how do we address that issue? We have sort of the heart where we want to go, but the practicality of it is not possible. And those archives are in disarray often, or they're just not attended to. But yet we know that they have value and that they will probably be respected in those places more than they are in other places. And you are very fortunate because there are archives that are just sitting in boxes
Yes,
at
I know.
institutions and nobody's doing anything with them.
Yeah.
That contradiction exists. Can you speak to that?
This is a hard one because it takes resources to do this work. I was just at Grinnell, and one of the things that I did was to lead 8 interns who were paid to explore and excavate the Black experience at Grinnell. The archivists who are there are great people, but their main job is really to sort of organize classes and take students and help students with research.
Mm-hmm.
What I have done is committed myself, I've committed money that I am sending to them to, one, create the Irma McClaurin papers, because their papers, I've been sending them material since 1971. So they may have some items that UMass may not have, but I want those items to be available. So I have pledged to send money to create the Irma McClaurin collection, and that they can bring together all the material they have. And what the students did was to do research on me. Some were assigned me, and then some were assigned the Black experience in general. They've now established a Black experience collection. That speaks to an institution that has resources, however, right? And they also have a digital librarian who is of Haitian descent. Petruska Moy was brought there because the largest collection of Haitian art is in Waterloo, Iowa.
Mm.
The largest collection in the country of Haitian art is in Waterloo, Iowa. So she was hired by Grinnell to create a partnership so that they can begin to make the art available. So she's working on digital platforms and that. And she also is going to work with us to create a digital platform for the Black experience. For Grinnell College, it is a way for them to try and bring back into the fold Black alumni who feel like they have no place. And certainly the work that they've done with Edith Winfrow Smith makes that, because they're naming a dormitory after her, and it's the newest dormitory. They've already had 300 applicants for 100 spaces. It is physically located on the other side of the street from the campus in the town, and it is a dormitory for community engagement. So its agenda is to build this. But what it will make clear is that Black people had a place in Grinnell, Iowa, contrary to what we had been told, that Grinnell was actually on the Underground Railroad, and that it actually was founded by people who had not only social gospel, but abolitionist principles. Now we can see ourselves in this institution. And I'm already starting to get response. I'm on a sister circle from Grinnell College of people saying, oh, I think I may have some stuff to put in it. So I'm trying to do that. And I connected the Grinnell Library with the UMass Library. So Danielle, who is the curator, one of the curators at UMass, actually spoke with the class. She created a video to talk to them about how we're trying to change the game. But part of why I chose to put my stuff in UMass is accessibility. Nobody's really going to go to Grinnell, and hang out. It's not designed that way. I had actually started out with Spelman, and at the moment that I talked to Spelman, they were only focused on people who had a relationship with them. So a lot of the people like Audre Lorde and Gloria Joseph and Tony K. Bambara, under the presidency of Dr. Janetta Cole, they had been invited back as artists in residence. And so they had a relationship. But even Spelman is not designed as a research library in that sense, even though they have these amazing collections. So by default, I ended up creating my own at an institution that already has the Du Bois Center. My vision is to create the McClaurin Black Feminist Archive Center so that there will be a constellation of activities and also programming around the archive. And so one of those is to have a summit to bring together people who are working on Black women's archiving from around the world together in one place. But I think to your point about HBCUs, I know that Ford Foundation has funded what's called the HBCU Library Initiative. I don't know how widespread it is, but I know that there was funding, and I'm hoping that, that there will be ways in which they can help build the capacity of HBCUs to just take care of what they already have, much less what they need to collect. Because I feel you. I was at Fisk and I was the interim director of the Race Relations Institute. And I know that those files were just sitting out in the open, that they weren't being preserved. So it's a real issue. And I think it's something that alumni can ask the institution, can we assist? Are there ways in which alum can assist these institutions in helping to preserve? Because some of them, like Fisk has one of 2 Bibles that Abraham Lincoln signed. I think there are only 2 or 3 in existence. And they have one in the library there, But also the first Race Relations Institute was founded at Fisk after World War II. But I don't know what the state of those papers are, and that's a challenge. I think that's a real challenge. Other comments, questions?
Dr. Hardison put in the chat,
Yes.
asking if you could talk more about the cost or expense of archives.
So archives are about labor, shipping. So for example, we were just lamenting perhaps before you joined us. I was fortunate when I shipped the first batch of my materials, which was 120 boxes. I was able to get a research grant it's called the Historical Archive Grant, HAG, from the Wintergren Foundation. Now, the key is, how did I find out about that? Because one of my white professors who saw that I was putting together the archive said, hey, there's this grant that Wintergren gives for people to process, not to digitize, but to process, like beginning the description, organizing, and then shipping. So they were able to pay for the shipping. So I had a storage unit that I'd had for 18 years in Florida. I was able to get there, hire help to help me pack up things, repack, and to ship it. In 3 years ago, that shipping cost $3,700 for 124 boxes. I have about 100 boxes in my Raleigh, North Carolina home that I'm getting ready to ship, and that price has now gone up to $5,000. So what I've done is to ask the library to split it with me, because I've raised money for I should say that I've raised enough money to make the archive into an endowed fund, and there is a match. So I have pledged out of my own resources of my annuity, what they call a qualified charitable deduction. The disbursement is that you can take money that you would have paid taxes on. Once you get to be a certain age, you have to take the money out of your retirement, and then you have to pay taxes on it. And one way that you can bypass or cut down on the amount of taxes is to make a charitable deduction directly from the annuity before taxes, and then it goes directly to them. So I've made a pledge to them for that. I've raised money. I've used my Facebook account, my birthday, to raise money. So I've raised on my own $30,000, and then we're in the process of they are going to actually feature the Black Feminist Archive in October at their Friends of the Library. These are their big donors who give to the library specifically. They are highlighting the Black Feminist Archive. So we're hoping we'll pick up some interesting people, and then we will be writing grants, Mellon grants, NEH grants, whatever we can do. And some of those, there's the Library Association that does have grants for digitizing and particularly unique collections. And so we'll be going after those kinds of funds. Because the archive is just getting started, as things come in, the library has actually been archiving or digitizing. So there, if you go to the page, you will see it's bit.ly.bfascua. And if you do that as a bit link, it'll take you there. If you just do UMass Black Feminist Archive, it'll come up. And on that page, there's some places that have hyperlinks. That means those materials have already been digitized. And then the ones that are in process, those are being digitized as they come. I have given funding, and I've asked people, family members, I don't need any more stuff. So if you want something to honor me, send a gift to the archive. And that's what people have been doing. And so some of that money is used to help with hiring students to digitize. We now have a relationship with Afro-American Studies. The new chair is an anthropologist. And so she has identified students who are going to be working with me on that. And they're starting to process papers. So because the library has a huge social change, now a research center, but they are focused. So they do have people dedicated to working on archives, and that is one of the benefits of going to a major university. Smaller institutions, the archivist and the librarian may be the same thing, or they may not have enough time to do the whole thing. So a lot of it just depends. But it is a cost. And so I've asked people, if you believe in this, if you think it's something that's important, then make a gift. And people have been able to do that. I see someone, Colo, has their hand raised. Cole?
Yeah, I was just listening to you, and I was just wondering what else could be done to make the archives come alive. It's text and images, for what they are, seem to be dead unless somebody brings them to life. And I was wondering, in your case, would it ever be possible for somebody to raise a fund to have an annual dialogue based on the archives, a series of seminars that students, researchers, especially international researchers, can come and take a look and speak to it at the end of their stay, like some kind of residency, so that there's an assurance that misconceptions or what we call oppositional readings of a text that you have saved can be corrected while you're still with us.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it come alive when it is not just that the theory of build it and the people will come. they
Right.
hardly don't come. So it's just listening to you and just thinking, oh, what would that kind of, what would it take? I know it will cost some pennies or some dollars, but what would be the value of it? That there's an annual, if you like, conference, if you like, seminar, that local, meaning those within this place, and international scholars who will be coming in contact with your work would also be able to air their own opinions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for those comments and those questions. What you've pointed out is something that is part of our agenda. I've talked about having a summit that would bring together people who are working on Black women's archives together. But also my model is the W.B. Du Bois Center at UMass, and that has many iterations. Ours is to change the profession, and so we are focused on bringing Black women archivists, people focused on archiving Black women together, but also they have residency scholars. And so we hope to be able to bring something like that as part of this. And every Monday, they actually have a group that is convened. And for an hour, they read from Du Bois's work and then have a discussion about, they try and connect what he was writing about then to what is happening with issues today. And that group meets regularly, but it takes someone to facilitate that. What I have done is there's now, and I will share with you, Erin, remind me, because I'll send the deck of this as a PDF. I've already created a bibliography of interviews that have been done with me, that, you know, I have created my own sort of iMovies and TikToks, you know, about the archive. And I will continue to do that, and I've talked about it in lots of different venues, and I've given permission for Erin, you know, for them to use the video on their YouTubes and things of that nature. So I'm doing what I can while I can, you know, to bring it alive, but I think you're right. And so one of the things that we're doing is building a website. And so maybe what we can do is to have a place for the videos, you know, to host the videos that are on there, and maybe have web chats. You know, that would make it more interactive, where people would be able, that we could have a space where once a month, maybe come on board, or have some of the different people come on board. For example, Sheila Walker, who is noted for her work on Africa and the African diaspora in Latin America. She's a she's a filmmaker. She's giving us 5,000 slides, all of her raw footage as well. And she's creating keywords so that it's consistent with what she wants. To have someone like that featured. So we have a place where we can feature someone from the archive. And so those who have passed on, we could have their family, like Zia is not around, but her son and her daughter still are. And her daughter is a journalist and was very active in doing the, you know, the marketing materials for her mom. You know, so I think you've got a great idea. And by the way, you know, one of the people that I worked with while I was at UMass was Chinua Achebe. I was his research assistant for several years. So I have great photos. He actually is in, I don't know if the photos of him are in the archive yet, but I do have photos of him. I've been in touch with his daughter, who was born in Amherst, to see if she's interested in putting her materials into the archive. So I am trying to bring it broader than just domestic, but to make it the largest archive of its kind in the world. So when I travel internationally, I try and give presentations. I presented at Wits University in Johannesburg. And one of the young people there was so inspired, they wrote an essay, which was then turned into an article and was published on Insight News, which is the newspaper, a Black newspaper that I'm a culture and educational editor for. So all of those things are going into the archive, and we're trying to make it as interactive as possible. But I thank you for your ideas, because they're right on point.
Well, I think when they sent out a follow-up to your last presentation, was your email address in that follow-up? I can't remember.
No, but you can reach me at blackfeministarchive@gmail.com.
Okay, that's good. I will do that. And
Okay,
I'm
Black
still an
Feminist.
alum, so it's nice to hear that you were actually Dr. Cole's, she was like a mentor of yours.
Very much a mentor, and also she is my daughter's godmother.
Her dress is in the museum in DC,
Yes, yes.
which I've seen, which is really nice to see. So you said Black Feminist Archive
At gmail.com.
at gmail.com. Got it. Okay.
Oh, did Kolo have his hand raised again?
Well, just a very tiny observation. I was looking at all the things that Black women have been, but the only one that seemed to be missing is wives. I wonder whether it was an omission or it was deliberate. If you can get on back to that slide, I looked
Okay.
carefully and I didn't see wives there.
Oh, well, you may
I was
have
searching
a
for it
point.
though. I was searching for it and I didn't see it. And I was wondering whether it was an omission or it was just a deliberate.
No, it's probably, I mean, I tried to cover as many aspects of one's life. And so that may have been overlooked because at the time I wasn't one. So it's not one that was like fresh in my mind. But that's a good point. The slide deck can be updated. Yeah.
I can say, Koe, that it's interesting because in my mother's case, she saw herself as a kind of interlocutor because she was the only wife in a family of 5 men. That is the only brother who got married. And so my mother took her job seriously as the wife of one of those people to be the collector and to be the mediator between family squabbles. So yes, I do think that there's an interesting way in which that identity has significance in a lot of ways as well. But I did understand my mother to see that she had a voice independently, but her role was to gather, was to pull, was to compile, to save, to preserve, and to often negotiate or adjudicate or help people to get over a hump because there was too many divisions. And so yes, that's an interesting, and it may be a role that often is overlooked as a result of that. That could be quite possible.
And also because it also links distances, whereby the wife most times does not come from the same place, also comes from another place, and allows that person the benefit of a history of a new place in which she has been. The whole idea of it is that a wife, as opposed to a mother or any of the other functions that women had known to play, is the ability to synthesize the lives of people from different places and present that synthesis in some way that would allow sometimes to see that we're not different after all, or our differences are in this because A, B, C, D, and E. So it's a role that if there's a conference in Bristol that looks at marriages on the African continent, and it's amazing the different types of marriages that exist on the African continent. It's the normal one and the Western one that is pushed and predominant is always the question of monogamy. But underneath it is a whole load of things. And like you have rightly said, she can mediate between different groups. But for me, it is the fact that sometimes the wives come from a totally different culture or a totally different location, and they bring into that new ideas or even different ideas that can speak to each other and create new identities and new stories and what have you. So that's why I was looking at it.
I think you made some good points, and I don't think that, I intentionally left off wives. I think it was just trying to think of all the ways in which women are, relational things. And so that's an omission. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. And if you can just put that in the chat, Erin, people can reach me at blackfeministarchive@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you again for this follow-up webinar on archiving and all of the work that you've done and your perspectives, and challenging everybody here on how to look at it and think about it differently. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. Mariama, anything else from you?
No, again, this is, the nuts and bolts matter, the big picture, the middle-sized picture, but also the practical experience that you bring to the table. So I think that was very valuable, the hands-on approach. So thank you for that. And for the people who didn't miss it, who listened to it, the recording, we will, if there are any further questions, we'll pass them along.
Okay, I'm always open to questions and comments. I am on a search for practicing Black women anthropologists who are not affiliated with academic institutions. So that's one of the grants that I'm working on, trying to identify, interview, and I have a small grant where I can help them with their to ship some things too. So I'm encouraging, if you know anybody who falls, and I'm using the term, if they either had an undergraduate, graduate, or in some ways see themselves doing anthropological work, even though they may not have a formal degree. Because Zora didn't have a formal PhD, I'm not holding people to that, as sort of the standard. And I'm using it very broadly, but I am looking for people who are doing this kind of ethnographic, anthropological, whether it's visual anthropology, ethnomusicology, outside of academic institutions, trying to make sure that they get preserved and identified.
Did Lavonda leave? Lavonda, you might want to have a follow-up conversation with Irma. Lavonda worked in Library of Congress for a very, very long time.
Yes, Lavonda's she's one of my mentees. So
Okay,
let me know how she's doing. Yeah.
Oh, check in with her, because I think a lot of the work that she was doing, collecting sort of privately while she was working publicly, makes an interesting example.
I think so. And we've talked about, so Erin, if you can just remind her to get in touch with me, because I think she would fit into sort of the larger way in which I'm defining, people doing this work of archiving, preserving, cultural preservation. That's important. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You are there. I know your name.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll follow up. I'll follow up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Good to see you.
Well, with that, we will go ahead and close things up. Thank you again, Dr. McClaurin, for everything today. And we'll pass along your email for folks to follow up, either from today's session or if they review the recording with things that they may want to touch base with you about.
And I'll make myself a note to send the slide deck so people have it, and also the bibliography, the BFA bibliography, because it has links to pretty much everything. And Erin, if you could send me the links that will go to the October talk, and then I'll put that in the bibliography. I'm just trying to keep track of every place there is a recording of me, so I'll have that as well. And then this one, when it has a link. So I just keep updating that, because now it's over a page. I'm just like delighted that there's now been so much about it. So, and thank you everybody for hanging in there. Much appreciated being asked again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, take care.